VP of Sales Engineering with Optiv+Clearshark. Alan Kessler, who is a board member with Thales Defense Security Inc. And Bill Nystrom, who's the field CTO for Telos Corporation. Bill, you want to start with a little bit about who you are and how you play in the space?
Is the mic working? Is that good? Everybody hear me? Sounds good.
Perfect.
All right. So I'm Bill Nystrom, the field CTO for Telos Corporation, and basically that means I'm customer-facing more than corporate-facing, because I've got all this prettiness going on that everybody wants to see. But really, I think it's because corporate wants me out of the office more. Primarily, if you don't know much about Telos, is we're a 50-year-old company. Born around the federal government, started as bringing small computers and printers to the federal marketplace, and expanding quickly into cybersecurity. Our flagship product is about GRC. You might know it as Exacta, and that's really about kind of automating some of the toil around regulatory guidance and authorities to operate. And then providing that kind of RMF and NIST visibility throughout the corporation. I'm primarily focused on the secure networks portfolio, bringing our secure network solutions, bringing together best-of-breed vendors, and providing a level of assurance to our customers and competence to be able to transit and access data wherever their mission dictates. A little bit about my background: spend a lot of time in the federal government, so it was a lot of time as a network engineer in the military. So I did 12 years as a network engineer in the military, and then about 12 years as a government civilian. So I spent a lot of time as a network engineer recovering from failure, and a lot of time as a government civilian recovering from failure. And that's to say that job is not easy. There's a lot of constraints that have to do with deploying technology in government and doing that in a secure way. And so, I'm happy to be part of this panel. I appreciate the invite and excited to talk about the topic.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Alan, would you like to give?
Sure. My name's Alan Kessler. I'm on the board of Thales Defense and Security Inc., and they're sort of the U.S. proxy, if you will, of Thales Corporation, and TCT is a part of that organization. I guess I get to bring a board level, governance level perspective to the panel. Also had an opportunity to be the CEO of a Vormetric data security and encryption company. And if has anybody ever owned a Palm Pilot? Yeah, a few. Okay. Well, I was the chief executive or the chief operating officer of Palm, and I tell the story of seeing the soft underbelly of capitalism. I was able to take Palm public on the NASDAQ stock exchange. So plenty of stories about what that's like and how crazy that is. Again, pleasure to be here today.
I just found mine the other day. I was cleaning out some stuff in the basement with a bunch of stuff from work, and I found it. I was like, oh, this is a cool little device.
There you go. Fantastic.
Saul?
Did you find the charger for it, though?
Yes, I did. I had to think about what it was.
Hi, everybody. I'm Saul, or Solomon Cates. About 25, almost 30 years now of technology and cybersecurity expertise. For those that know Vormetric, I was the first systems engineer on the job, working with federal customers back in 2003 timeframe. So my background and my expertise has always been around protecting information, critical infrastructure, keys, these boring things called HSMs and stuff that just keep the lights on from a security standpoint and building strong trust. Nowadays, I was at Thales for 2003 till just last year. I've been on the job now at Google for about a year. I've worked with them for many years, though, as a partner. So my background is really focused not only just systems engineering, but innovation, technology. I was the VP of technical strategy for Thales for some time. And then I had the opportunity to go into business development and work hands-on with our partners from the Telos side into companies like Google and Amazon and other cloud providers. So for me, when I look at things as, from a landscape, it's mainly through technology as an answer to these fundamental problems that we've had over and over again in every architecture. When it comes to cloud, I'm blessed with being there at the beginning on many fronts, both the SaaS and the infrastructure. And nowadays, everything's just a hardware as a service. You can roll it into your data center and have your own. And so for my responsibilities at Google is I do cover enterprise, regulated, and sovereign needs, particularly around key management and encryption. So that's me.
Great, thank you. Okay, Brent, last but not least.
Sure. I'll bring up the rear. My name is Brent Hansen. I'm with Optiv+Clearshark, and it's an organization that I've worked with in the past when I was at Thales, and I think their unique offering being acquired by Optiv really brings a best-in-class from enterprise to federal governments, and not only partnering with the most strategic cybersecurity vendors out there here today, such as Thales, but really building that blueprint and that reference architecture of what good looks like today. We're up against an enemy and an adversary unlike none other based on what's happening in the globe today. And so being able to be a part of that fabric and that vision is incredibly exciting. I'm excited to be here. And of course, I spent some time at Vormetric and Thales, and I only had 2 interviews for my job to get hired at Vormetric, and Saul was number 2, so he must like me.
You did good enough.
You can say that now. Great, thank you. So the discussion around today's cloud panel is around our cloud security study that was done in 2023. And I'm going to give you a little background about the study before we start the questions. The 2023 study was commissioned by Thales and S&P Global Market Intelligence. If there's a dominant theme that the data from the 2023 Thales Global Cloud Security Study conveys, it's that the world has become cloud-first, multi-cloud, and that it's more complex to secure the cloud. The latest edition of the survey of nearly 3,000 respondents in 18 countries explores the challenges in security in the cloud environments that have become a critical element in modern digital infrastructure and services. While there has been improvement in the overall cloud security posture from the previous year, there is still work to be done to simplify and secure the cloud operations, especially when it comes to addressing human error. Multi-cloud operations bring with them operational complexity, sometimes that needs to be tamed and secure cloud environments effectively and efficiently. And I must say, when I first joined SafeNet and we started talking about cloud, we were only talking about one cloud. We weren't talking about multiple clouds like we do today. We're talking about Google and Azure and AWS and Oracle, and the list goes on and on. The study reinforces what most of us know. Multi-cloud is a reality, regardless of cloud maturity. In the survey, 79% of issuers respondents have more than one cloud provider. The average number of cloud infrastructure providers is well above 2, which is 2.3, which is, I don't call that well above, but okay. SaaS usage is growing, and all of this expansion means there is more to manage and is secure, and the sensitive data is distributed in more locations. Majority of the respondents, 55%, note that they find more complex to secure data in the cloud, and the increasing number of cloud providers could be driving that issue. So let's get to the first question. Every cloud service provider offers similar but unique solutions for securing your data in their cloud. What are the challenges with managing the security of data in a multi-cloud architecture? Saul, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, so even though I work at Google, I'll represent the technology and the problem more holistically. Just a little background, if you guys have ever heard of something called Cipher Cloud Key Manager, CCKM, that was my prototype and patent and my team that run that through our technology office back at Thales. So I have a deep appreciation for this fundamental problem of control, right? I want to use a cloud provider, A, B, and C. It could be SaaS, could be infrastructure. And the fundamental shift that has to happen is the responsibility of who's in charge of the data, who's responsible for making sure it's safe, secure, compliant, and so forth. So when you're talking about one cloud provider, like at the very beginning of all of our journeys, we all probably looked at things like Salesforce and AWS were probably our first big players that we looked at. What we saw was having one way of doing key management or data protection or policy management was fine, but once we got the second version, and that second provider in that same category, everything was different. And there's no standard, right, for how does one do key management across all these providers. There's no body we go to get certified. You had to sort of figure it out. So the platforms like CCCam and others were sort of emerging because of this fundamental need, which is everybody does it differently. The data is different, the keys are different, how much control you have is different. And it's evolved quite a bit over the last probably 6-7 years to the point now where there's a lot of control that's given to the customer. I can completely control my keys and have them held outside of the cloud, and the cloud must reach out to me. Hold my own key is what we call that term. So I hold the key, and it has to come to me, and it gives us control over things like subpoena, right? Somebody wants to look at my data, they have to come to me to get the key to actually unlock that information. But there's also this other sort of problem that comes along with that, which is how do you effectively manage the fleet of keys and policies and controls that are in the cloud and have that synergize with your enterprise needs, right? So technical ways and product ways of solving that problem, we can all talk about, with offerings like CCCam and Cipher Trust, and all that's fantastic. But it's that shift of the mindset of how much control do I want to actually have to own? And it's the answer that every organization has to wrestle with. Some of them, they want everything on-prem. I want my own cloud on the prem. I want to have everything within my control or within my trusted partner's controls. And I can't trust the third party, Google, Amazon, Oracle, whoever. All the way to, I don't have the skills or the people or the budget to do that. So I need something that's going to be that middle ground or give me just enough control over the data and the keys to be effective. And it's amazing to me. I'm sitting here, I've seen faces in this room that I've known for 20-something years that have all been in the same space, and we're looking at the same darn problem over and over again, and that is too much privilege. Cloud providers, they're great. They have all these great controls, but they have all the privilege, right? It's their stuff, it's their room, it's their house, it's their technology, and they have to be willing to share that with you. And demand from the market is what shapes those changes. It always has. So you have to show up with your pocketbook and say, I want these things at this price point.
Do you think that when people start leveraging key managers in the cloud, are they just going with the default and not looking at more ownership of the keys until, as an afterthought rather than a forethought? Is that shifted at all, in recent years, or is it pretty consistent that they go with the default key manager in that cloud provider, and then somewhere along the way there's some governance or compliance that comes into play that says, hey, who owns these keys? And if that's not, the answer is not you, then you need to do something about it.
Yeah, you labeled it very nicely there. The thing that we end up seeing is status quo is easy, right? You show up and say, give me the default stuff, it's free, and I don't have to do anything. Check the box. But then the auditor comes up like, that box doesn't work for me. You need to shift over to here, and you need to have more control over it. Well, the lift to doing that can be substantial, depending on skills, capabilities, and such. So I think that's the short answer is yes. And dirty little secret, and all us cloud providers have a default encryption option, and 90% plus of our customers use that only. Like less than 10% actually manage their keys the way we want them to.
Yeah, because they don't have to know how to use it. They just check the box and they go, oh, it's done.
There's
I
no.
can say yes, I have it.
Yeah, there's no auditor with a gun sitting next to them making them change. It's what has to make them change.
Yeah, definitely. So this question goes to Bill. It's clear that SaaS usage is growing, but how is it impacting cloud security?
So I'll take this from kind of the government perspective. We're not, obviously, there's an acknowledgement, cloud is, it's not nearly a legacy technology, but it's definitely a mature technology. And so as you slice up that pizza model, people feel safe about, I'll just rent the computers in the sky to get me some resiliency, and like, oh, maybe I can add the operating system, that'd be more pragmatic. Now they're like, why am I doing all that? Let me just consume the services. And what I'll say is the reason why I think that SaaS is exploding, especially in government, has everything to do with emergent business needs. I think if it was up to the IT group, they'd be like, hey, we have a portfolio of options. They're mostly good enough, and we can right-size it to your requirement and work with you to make sure that they fall within our security controls. And then the business leader goes, however, our revenue hangs on being able to leverage the key features in this SaaS, so please do this yesterday. And then, so what I would say is a lot of times, the intention is to go into a single cloud environment, but, the reality is that, I don't see a world where we're not persistently in a federated or involving federated environment. And I think SaaS is the driver for that. But I think the primary concern with that is there's a lack of governance on how to consume and use and secure SaaS, or whether to migrate it to maybe a consolidated platform after the business need, or maybe based off the timeline. And so I would say that governance here is the most important part of the SaaS adoption, is understanding with your group, having a discussion on how will we go about onboarding SaaS, what's the data gravity of our requirement, what's the data transit policy. So I agree. I think the acknowledgement early, especially by the IT group, that we need to manage our keys, we need to manage our destiny when it comes to portability, I think is a really important discussion to have before the business group comes back and says, hey, we need this SaaS offering real quick. And I'll say, a lot of people just avoid the word governance. They think it's like a jail or a padded room, like everything would be awesome, but we're in this jail. I actually see it the exact opposite. I think governance is more like, the world is dark and scary, and governance gives you a flashlight and a map. And so if you're able to navigate and, God forbid, you get fragged, somebody can follow your footsteps and recover you. So I think, that's a key. It's a key part of this journey, is understanding that the business units and the mission is going to want to consume SaaS. So how do you do that securely? How do you do that with the oversight and manageability and portability you need?
Yeah. If you look at the cloud, the security model where, you as a consumer has a responsibility as well as the cloud provider. With SaaS, your only responsibility from a security perspective is your data, because the cloud provider takes care of all of that, right? So it becomes even more important, because you are responsible for the data, to make sure that you're protecting it in a SaaS, because they're taking care of everything else, right? And that's one of the things I've heard, and I attend a lot of conferences. Sometimes I speak, sometimes I go and listen. What I'm hearing in the government space is they're trying to utilize SaaS applications as much as possible, right? When the whole cloud thing started, it was more like a lift and shift, infrastructure as a service is what they were looking to use, other than like Salesforce, right, as an example, because that really was the leader in the SaaS space. But really, they were looking to just lift and shift, and come to realize it's not easy to lift and shift your stuff to the cloud. Maybe you need to re-engineer it to leverage capabilities within the cloud. One of those is SaaS. And one of the reasons they say they're going to utilize SaaS as much, because the maintenance of the application is on the onus of the SaaS provider. It's one less thing they don't have to worry about. They don't have to worry about being out of date with their upgrades or anything like that. It's all done for them. So that's what I'm hearing, is they're trying to go and leverage SaaS as much. Now, do the SaaS applications always fit their need, or are they just trying to fit it to a SaaS application, whether it's their need or not? I don't really know, right? But I think it's interesting to take that into consideration. So let's go on to the next topic of human error leading the cause of cloud data breaches. Organizations identify the potential exposure of applications and data stored in the cloud as a risk. In fact, about half, 46%, say they have experienced a data breach in their cloud environment. The number experiencing a data breach in the last year is up 4 percentage points, from 35% to 39% from last year's studies. Respondents say that human error is the leading cause of cloud data breaches, which might be an indication that the strategy they are using for platform management is not sufficient. In the study, 55% of the respondents chose human error as the leading cause of cloud data breaches. So now
Yeah, and I think Brent and I are going to tag team this a little bit. So I think, again, a little bit from the board perspective, you want to be able to, you need to make those trade-offs. Are you focused on the back end, securing keys, locking down your infrastructure? What hits the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post are generally what the data bears out. And IBM just recently published some data from some research they did, and CloudStrike as well. It's authentication and to some degree, application configuration. It's sort of the front end. Now, you could argue that those are highly or correlated with human error. So organizations are trying to figure out, and boards only have a certain amount of resources that they can choose to invest in the technologies. And quite frankly, it's what's happening at the front end of the application and not so much the back end that makes the headlines. And again, as a board, and as the data suggests, you're going to get breached. But what you need to be able to do is look at your shareholders and say that you've done not even necessarily best practice, but industry practice, what is expected. Unless you're on, obviously, some in this room, a very specific, focused mission, everything's air-gapped, everything's super critical, where you have to control everything. Generally, the industry's going to go that way. I'll turn it to Brent.
Yeah, sure. I think that it's always interesting when a data breach happens because of human error. That conversation between those who own security and governance and those who own the budget becomes much more friendlier, because oftentimes I think there's a certain amount of budget, you've got a certain amount of people, process, and products, and it's really around the mandates and governance that you take those three key ingredients and you empower that administrative workforce to go out and make good decisions and to ensure that you're doing the proper training, you're doing the proper empowerment of them so that they know that there are rules and guardrails in which how you should onboard infrastructure or a SaaS provider, or if you're looking to repatriate, how do you clean up loose ends? And so when it comes to human error, I'm always a person of statistics, and I have a couple notes here. So when I was preparing for this, I wanted to look at human error and dive a little bit deeper. So when you look at in history, what are some of the greatest events that happened or tragedies that were because of human error? And I'm sure maybe you might have heard of some of these, and I'm going to bring this back to data. So number one was the sinking of the Titanic. So if he would have just slowed down, right? So that human error caused an incredible tragedy. Another one was Chernobyl. And again, it's not that equipment failed, it's that people failed. Another one was the 89th Academy Awards, giving the wrong envelope to the wrong presenter with the wrong winner. And again, something so scripted, so practiced, lo and behold, human error happens right on live TV. The other one is the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, Exxon oil spill, and the 3 Mile meltdown. But when you look at human error, now that I'm a parent, and I've been a parent for a long time, like that car insurance commercial, I'm becoming my parent. So I'm starting to repeat phrases that were ingrained upon me that I'm not sure held much water, but have you learned from your mistakes? Are you asking the same question twice? And when you look at, are we learning from our mistakes as a society, as data practitioners, as cybersecurity fellows? I would say that probably not. Because when I look back in history and I look at the Capital One breach, incredible, gigantic, result, misconfiguration. If you look at Equifax, failed to update and patch. If you look at Uber, they chose speed over security based on their development innovation and how fast they could go, giving developers carte blanche access to customer data to do innovative and to do testing with applications. And then, lastly, because I'm a Marriott member, just poor protection and insider threat. So when you look at these things, I mean, if we learn from our mistakes, and I were a CISO for another large agency or organization where I saw them breached, I would want to understand, how do we not become that same person. How does that not happen to us? And it's, again, you've got limited people, process, and products, and now you've got multi-cloud, you've got repatriation happening. So human error is, are we learning from our mistakes? Are we putting our budget where our aspirations are? And I would say probably not. And sometimes when it comes to cyber, and I'll give it back to you in a moment, sorry, is that sometimes you have to slow down to go faster. And in my experience over the years with Formetric and Thales, it's, hey, we don't know where our data's at. Let me get back to you. When I get back to you, that data's already changed from the day that you did the report. And then, gosh, I don't want to take time to do encryption. Okay, hey, we will find a way to do live data transformation. We will transform your data to an encrypted state without taking anything down, without any performance hit. Okay, great, we'll get around to that. But again, as history serves, if all of the data was encrypted with the proper access control, administration, blinding root, and administrators, the world would be a different place. So I always, maybe it'll be my next great blog is, have we learned from our mistakes? And I would say no. And it takes time. You have to slow down to go faster, and maybe it's to go safer.
You mentioned Equifax. When I was on the commercial side of the company, I went to Equifax in Georgia, and they were just using storage encryption, and they thought that was sufficient to protect their data. And I'm like, do you understand when the storage is powered on, it's not protected. And that's part of your problem. And so their solution was they were going to move everything to the cloud.
And one thought, in the early days of the cloud, we would sit here and say, how can we trust the cloud providers by giving them our key material, et cetera. And now I would almost argue that you almost have to trust the cloud providers. They have more resources than you. How can you, as a chief information security officer or CIO, keep your people trained? We had a really short story. We had a high-profile financial services customer, not in the Fed, but in the Mid-Atlantic area. And they had some training issues, some challenges with backing up their key material. And they basically lost, they thought they lost everything. And the CIO called me and said, well, so you guys have a back door into your HSM, right? So you can, and I said, no, that's the whole idea. We don't have a back door in your, and fortunately, after days of looking through backups or whatever, one of our top folks was able to get the key material. But that was quite enlightening because that organization just didn't have the training. And as a vendor, we didn't know what we didn't know. So the as-a-service type of offerings that are getting increasingly better, I think, are advantageous to help mitigate some of the problems.
Yeah, you bring up training. That's a huge topic of conversation at a lot of these DoD conferences that I go to because the cybersecurity workforce is shy, thousands to millions of people globally, right? And when you start moving workloads to the edge, you don't have your subject matter experts out there at the edge, so it has to be easy to use. They have to be able to be trained to a level where it is easy to use so they can support it when they're not, sitting at the enterprise. So, training is probably a big part of that human error that occurs just from lack of training.
I think that there's also a fundamental problem with how agencies, vendors, whoever, how they decide to purchase software. So they have a problem, make this problem go away. We're going to evaluate these 3 vendors, and we'll choose one. Typically, the people that evaluate the software based on solving the use cases are not the practitioners that actually implement and install it. And oftentimes, there's a long gap of time between we bought it and then you hand it over to someone like, hey, I've never heard of your company, like how am I supposed to deploy encryption or how am I supposed to do this? And again, it's learning from mistakes, like how do you not get the practitioners involved in those decisions when you're just handing them something? It's happened time and again. So that training and how you hit the ground running with investment is difficult.
I'd like to add just a couple of comments about kind of talent management, especially when it comes to kind of cyber defense, cybersecurity. I think fundamentally, if you look across, global economy has said, hey, we've had a shortfall in the cyber workforce for some time now, and then all of a sudden, there's all these programs and there's lots of demand, right? But we still have a huge deficit in the number unfilled cybersecurity jobs. And after some research, it doesn't look like it's a matter of desire from I think somehow cybersecurity became cool. Just all it needed was a hoodie, and you're good. But what we have is an ascension problem, right? So if you look at your senior engineers, your senior security engineer, right? They're pegged. They're doing high-level tasks, low-level tasks. If you're good enough, you maybe have some senior level techs, analysts, guys and gals, kind of running over that. But there's eyes on target there for just assurance. But when you look at these entry-level jobs, right? The entry-level job to me is no experience, right? You look at every entry-level job. You even look in the government. 3 years. You need to have 3 years of prerequisite experience for an entry-level cyber job. I think that businesses need to look at that and say, if we're going to grow our cybersecurity competency and do stuff like, hey, let's get in, do some evaluations, and understand what the controls are. I think companies and the government really needs to look at how it's grooming and ascending that workforce, especially from entry level.
Great addition to that. Okay, on to the next topic. There's a dramatic increase in the sensitive data reported in the cloud. The study looked at the amount of sensitive data that is stored in the cloud. There is a dramatic increase in this sensitive data reported in the cloud. 75% of the respondents report that 40% or more of their data in the cloud is sensitive, which is up from 49% in 2021. With so much sensitive data moving to the cloud, do you think that security of that data is top of mind during the migration effort? Saul?
Ooh, good question. I think the answer is split, right? It depends on usually the vertical that the customers are coming from, military and intelligence and state, so anything federal, whether here or abroad, traditionally has some kind of idea of what they see they need to have for controls around the information before they enter in. But the second class is going to be those more traditional commercial or those that are starting off in a greenfield and they're not bringing any data in. I think the reason that there's so much difference in how data is protected between those two really has to do with the origin of existing information that has to go through process and procedure and obviously controls and capabilities like encryption and so forth will emerge around that. But if you're in a greenfield, you're moving into cloud for the first time, or this is a new application for a new organization, having the right rails to compare yourself to, like you did on the on-site side, or some kind of specialized framework like ITAR or IL levels that you need to be compliant with, depending on the actual application and the people around that application, the owners of the data effectively. We quite often see that they're going to be very unsophisticated in their controls compared to those that grew up on a traditional application on-prem. Now that said, there's definitely hope there. What we've been working on at Google, for example, and our other our competitors are doing similar things, is how do we reduce the amount of knobs on the cloud for an organization to be secure and compliant. So we use a tool called assured workloads, and what that basically means is you come to our platform, you create an organization or a project within our platform, and that platform will have guaranteed rails on it. That it can only be used in the US, it's only going to be on FedRAMP environments, here's the controls you're allowed to use. By default, encryption's turned on a certain way. Keys are kept outside of the cloud, they're managed inside of an external key management system. That's sort of what we see as sort of the path that we're going down to help shore up the lack of sophistication or the too much complexity of the cloud. Because as much as we like to think ours is the best because ours is developer friendly, we love our engineers love our stuff, they really do, and we've swallowed the pill that we know we're not everybody's first choice for a cloud provider, but we're always their second choice. We found that out. And the reason for that is they might choose Amazon or Azure for their primary use cases for whatever business or mission reason. But from a capability and a flexibility and a performance perspective, they'll choose Google because we're everywhere. We pioneer a lot on things like safety and security. We're very open to having customers control everything. because what we want to do is be really good at the infrastructure and the applications we do. So I think that to get back to your question, I think the types of controls, the types of management of their information will really sort of come from that. Is it an existing application or is it a brand new application?
Yeah. Any other comments before we move on? Okay. All right. Next topic is the cloud data concerns. Even though there's more data in the cloud and more of that data is considered sensitive, there is still much that is not encrypted. More sensitive data is being encrypted, but levels are still low. Only 22% of the respondents report that more than 60% of their sensitive data in the cloud is encrypted, with the average being 45% of the data being encrypted. The report also says that complex key management creates security and operational risks. 62% have 5 or more key management systems, which is something we talked about earlier, and only 14% say that they control all of their own encryption keys in the cloud. Significant amounts of sensitive data, sensitive cloud stored data, are unencrypted. What data protection measures are in place? Are these measures sufficient? Brent?
So I think that when you do migrate to cloud or in a multi-cloud approach and wherever you may be at in your journey, you're inherently safer than doing it as you always have, perhaps in your own data center. And there's, again, a lot of guardrails, and as Saul said, there's encryption, there's key management, there are things that are built in that are very easy to use. And I have told this story many times around if you had a bunch of possessions that you just didn't really have room for and you wanted to get a storage locker, let's say at U-Haul, and you want to put those possessions in there, so you rent a really nice big humidity controlled and you throw your possessions in, you don't have room, but they're incredibly valuable, you shut it down. So I'm entrusting them to keep my stuff safe. But I'm not going to leave it unlocked, correct? So an easy thing to do is probably bring a padlock or some sort of mechanism to lock it. Now, where do you get that padlock from and the key? Do I go to the U-Haul front desk for the high school kid with a really cool haircut or perhaps a hoodie and ask him, do you got a padlock I can use with a key? I'm going to use that. And then when you leave, after you lock it up, do you just drop the keys at the counter and say, man, my stuff's safe. They have my possessions in a garage door. It's locked. But they own the keys and they own the padlock. So who's to say when they may go in and check it out? Like, what could happen, right? I don't have observability into when perhaps my storage locker is open. So with that, I always think about cloud the very same way, and then think about if you had multiple storage environments with multiple keys and multiple padlocks and multiple people who are moving things around, right? The complexity is huge, and I think cloud makes things safer, and they make encryption safer. But again, if you're not bringing your own encryption, or if you're not bringing your own key material and you're not centralizing that, you're making your job harder. And again, a theme around human error, you're opening yourself up for more oopsies that could potentially happen. So when you're looking at things as a service, like HSM as a service, right, there's a lot of things you can do to offload some of that administration to a vendor such as Thales, and that makes life easier. It frees up more time. But if I were to put sensitive data in the cloud, which everyone's doing, not using native encryption, is a first oopsie. But if you're not bringing your own encryption or bringing your own key material when you can, especially even with SaaS providers, like, you're not doing your diligence. Like, that's the very least thing that you can do.
Anybody else have comments?
Yeah, I would say that I think portability is a business imperative when it makes sense. And so controlling your own destiny, controlling your own ability to be able to make sure that data not only is portable with your encryption, but it also, there's no hindrance to be able to have you access that. I think, considering data at rest, I think most people understand that. Data in motion, I think that's pretty, commonplace, but also data in use, encryption in use, right? So making sure that end-to-end, there's a security protection, there's an encrypted layer protecting your data set, I think is is really paramount, especially when you're looking at how to secure your data and how to make sure that data is portable, and be able to make sure that the business has what it needs when it needs.
Great. All right, last topic, but certainly not the least, is data sovereignty. Digital sovereignty is a global strategic initiative, and privacy compliance represents opportunities for enterprises to mature their data management capabilities. It can present challenges with requirements to control and manage where the data is stored and used and who has access to it. When asked about digital sovereignty, 83% of the respondents worldwide say they are somewhat or very concerned about impacts on cloud performance. When it comes to data sovereignty, I always wondered, how does that apply to the U.S. government when I first read this report? And because to me it seemed like it was more of a European or global concern. But recently I was at Rocky Mountain Cipher in Colorado Springs, and a colonel from UConn was on a discussion panel, and where he said that if they have their cloud on the military base, then they have sovereignty over that data because it's considered U.S. soil, even though it's sitting in Germany. So now I was like, okay, now I get it. Now I see where it has that play from the U.S. perspective. In the global cloud world, the term sovereignty is about where the data lives in the U.S. government. Do you think of that for FedRAMP, GovClouds, regions, etc., address data sovereignty concerns? Paul?
Yeah, so just so everybody's aware, I've been on sovereignty for probably most of my career, and actually a lot of it was in the federal business. Sovereignty is about control over a dominion, a domain, right, an infrastructure. And so if you look at cloud and you look at on-prem, on-prem's always been in this camp of sovereign, usually. If you have the guards, the guns, the people, the infrastructure, that's all you, that's sovereign to your point about having it on the base. Nowadays, we know how to make sovereign clouds in a box. You roll it in, it's got all the cool toys, it's got all the same capabilities, and where you run it, how you run it, who you run it with is your choice. But if your goal is sovereignty, you're going to make sure it's your personnel, your people, so on and so forth. What people think about in data sovereignty in the world right now, or digital sovereignty, is really synonymous with the GDPR and Schrems II ruling. It's really impacted American businesses and European businesses. Not so much the governments, because they already understand the concept of sovereignty, and they've already been working with their partners to get sovereign capabilities on their own soil for many, many years. What I see as a shift that's happening is the awareness in the commercial side of the world to this idea of responsibility of data that must be sovereign. Because sovereignty, digital sovereignty, has a spectrum. There's data sovereignty, which means I control the data in the way that is compliant with the rules and regulations that make it sovereign in my jurisdiction. A la, I don't want to be a French organization having workloads run in Europe, work in America, as an example, and the Cloud Act gets used to actually penetrate and look at my information without my control. Right? That's their perspective. Here in the States, we want probably the opposite. Right? We want to make sure we don't have an American information on foreign soil that's not in a sovereign infrastructure, that's owned by us. So when we look at it, the data sovereignty is all around where's the keys and where's the data. And I use keys specifically because almost every regulation calls for encryption as the fail-safe, right? To make sure that the only way you can open this is with the keys within the jurisdiction it's supposed to be in. The other part on the spectrum is, there's two more. There's operational sovereignty, which is like the sovereignty in a box. I roll it into your data center. I can have full control over what workloads go in it, who has access to the doors. Like, this is traditional private cloud, right, more or less, which is more tools and toys these days. But the other end of the spectrum is called software sovereignty, and hardware sovereignty sort of goes with that. And what that means is the actual infrastructure that I'm counting on to run this, I've inspected, I have firmware control, I have the expertise, or I have a team that I trust, a third party that I trust, to actually build me a sovereign system from chip to API, right? So when we look at it as just a global trend, I think data sovereignty we'll see in spades for a long time. And how we'll wrestle with it per jurisdiction is going to fall down to a couple different architectures. Everything's in the country, or I keep the keys in my country and I have a workload abroad because I might need to, right? I need something on the edge. This is a global application. That part where the data has residency or data is being used is going to be the conversation for most organizations. So I think that's sort of how I see it, is it's really the spectrum of the capability, but also why are you being told to make it sovereign? If you're already an operation or a mission that's keeping data inside of a certain jurisdiction for either FISA court requirements or just data sovereignty requirements based upon our SREMS ruling, the architectures are going to boil down to just those three: data sovereignty, operational sovereignty, and software sovereignty. So I think it's going to be simpler than we think, but it also is that conversation. Why are we doing it? Because having data sovereignty doesn't necessarily make you go faster, it makes you go slower sometimes. It also doesn't make you more immune to compromise, right? Because now you have more moving pieces and more places spread around. So, while I love sovereignty as a mission, I have a motto on my LinkedIn: sovereignty for all. That's my life mission. I want everybody to have their own sovereignty. Everybody should have their own enclaves. I think that's an important thing. But that said, I think when we look at it through the lens of the world today, that shift into data sovereignty is being led by compulsory requirements that hopefully are giving people enlightened information around their information, how they're managing it, and where it needs to be kept and governed.
Okay, thank you. One last question. What are the additional complexities imposed on industry as a service offerings when working with the federal government? Bill?
Yeah, I'll start this. I think there's no shortage of list of complexities when kind of dealing with any as-a-service option with the government. Top of which is, to be honest, the budget does not support as-a-service from a consumption standpoint. So it's always interesting to figure out how to kind of project what those consumption rates will be, how that will work within that period of performance, and still be FAR compliant, right? And so I think that's the initial part, but dealing with things like obviously data sovereignty, data rights, and then the federal government is really, really good at data classification. Well, I'll say they're really, really proficient at data classification. But often, data classification comes at a cost, and it comes at some refined controls that need to be considered. So when you look at, maybe an as-a-service offering on, even a FedRAMP low, or maybe just a commercial cloud, and then you have CUI, there's some considerations that you need to make sure that you're handling that right, or you're going to be in either breach of contract or cause a security incident. And if you've ever seen how the federal government handles a classification incident, it's not for the faint of heart. It's not like, okay, we'll erase that data and we'll do an after-action report. No, it's more like what you see when the Air Force comes in and takes over the NASA consoles, right? It's like, no, sorry guys, you don't own this anymore. This is ours. And they power down and they remediate on their timeline. So it's not just in the best interest of the government to make sure that the P's and Q's are dotted and they understand what kind of agreement they're getting into. And I think that having the FedRAMPs, the predefined FedRAMP controls at the appropriate security level is not only nice to have, it's absolutely the table stakes. But also understanding from an industry standpoint that no kidding, this is a bad day if you just, maybe your marketing team or your sales team is like, no, we can do this, it's amazing, it's great. If there is a leakage or a spill and it's deemed sensitive enough, that could shut down a portion of your operations for a significant time.
Well, thank you very much. We have a few minutes left. I want to let you know, on your table, there is a QR code that you can scan to get a copy of the cloud security report that we've been talking about today. And we have a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up? We got a couple minutes left. Okay, no questions? Are you guys guys want to give like?
Here's one, maybe.
Okay, so his question was, do we see trends in agencies moving data out of the cloud?
Yep.
Great question.
Yep, data repatriation, it's being called, right? Like you're bringing it back out of the cloud for a workload, a classification event, some kind of reason to leave and abandon the cloud. The thing I would caution everybody to understand when they make these decisions, how much does it cost you to leave? Egress costs. Amazon will kill you. I mean, we'll bite you, and I'm sure Microsoft has their own, measurements, but it's the understanding what's the ramification of the actual transformation and transaction of getting it out. Sometimes even just in place, right? So we have some offerings out there, we can just ship you your gear and it's right back to your data center, but it's still costly, right? So yeah, it does happen, but it's a really specific decision.
Yeah, from a customer perspective, we're seeing the same thing. And it really is driven by kind of experience, kind of gained experience over, they were mandated to go to the cloud, so bull rushed in, didn't change any of their organizational operational procedures to accommodate that. So they still have maybe the staff that was doing the on-prem stuff, and then they looked at the costs, and they're doing they're not sized correctly for the operation, so they get an unexpected bill. They look at their internal costs and go, well, it's cheaper if we just do it here. I would caution that, I think, as you're talking to your agencies or having some competence around this area, it's a more measured discussion. I think absolutely some things need to come on-prem and stay on-prem, and they need to be distributed. It shouldn't be in one spot. But I think on the other standpoint, what's the du jour today? We spent all morning today talking about AI. What are you going to do there? Right? Like, you're going to need infinite scale to be able to get business continuity to get business value out of that. And so, what are you going to do? Just kind of move it out to move it back in. So I think it's a portability discussion. It's a right sizing, being able to take your data and move it as you will. But again, I think I see that same trend is like now it ends up being more of a business decision based off of the agency or the customer didn't transform their operations to have the cloud skill set, to be honest.
Yeah, there was somebody at a DOE conference. They said, if anybody tells you that you're going to save money by moving to the cloud, you're wrong. Because it's going to cost you more money, but you're going to gain so much more from having your workloads in the cloud that you wouldn't be able to leverage a lot of those capabilities having them on-prem. But I think everybody's a lot smarter now about really examining what they want to move to the cloud and what cloud is best suited for that particular application. Whereas, before it's like everything just went to AWS because that was the cloud, right? Now you've got choices, so now you're trying to move those workloads to the appropriate cloud, where it's going to run most of the most efficiently. And that was not the trend, 8 or 10 years ago when this whole cloud thing happened. So I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you all for listening. And like I said, you can download the report, or if you have any more questions for any of us, please feel free to visit us now. Is it lunchtime? Oh, where's the announcement?
Thanks, Gina, and all our panelists. That was an engaging discussion, interesting, big topic. So we're going to break for lunch. There's 2 buffet lines back that way. So I encourage you to grab a plate, bring it back here. We're going to have our keynote speaker starting at 12:15. All right? Thanks.